In 2019, I was working as a geological surveyor in West Virginia, specifically in McDowell County. Anyone familiar with the area knows it's riddled with abandoned coal mines, remnants of a once booming industry that has since left these mountains hollow and scarred. My job involved mapping potentially dangerous mine shafts for the state's Environmental Protection Department. Most days were routine: locate the shaft, document its condition, and move on to the next site. But what happened on October 15th still haunts me. I was checking a particularly remote location about 2 miles off the nearest service road. The autumn leaves were turning, creating that beautiful but somehow melancholic atmosphere that's unique to the Appalachians. The shaft I was looking for had been reported by a local hunter who'd almost fallen into it while tracking a deer. When I finally found the entrance, it was smaller than most, maybe 4 feet in diameter. Years of erosion had partially collapsed the opening, but you could still see the rotting wooden support beams. Standard procedure required me to set up safety equipment before approaching any shaft. So I started unpacking my gear. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in these woods. It was faint, but unmistakable. Crying. Not an animal, but human crying, echoing from somewhere deep in the shaft. I called out, "Hello? Is someone down there?" My voice bounced off the walls of the shaft, creating an eerie chorus of echoes. The crying stopped immediately. Following protocol, I radioed for backup and waited. 20 minutes later, 2 local deputies arrived. We set up proper lighting and safety lines, and one of the deputies and I prepared to investigate the shaft. The descent was tight and treacherous. The shaft dropped about 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Our lights revealed the usual scene: rusty tools, rotting timber supports, and debris. But something was off. Among the decades-old mining equipment, we found fresh footprints in the coal dust and mud. We followed the prints deeper into the mine. The air got thicker, and that distinctive smell of coal dust mixed with something else, something organic and wrong. The footprints led to a narrow tunnel that branched off from the main chamber. That's when we heard the crying again, closer this time. It sounded like a woman, but there was something unnatural about it. The deputy called out, but again the crying stopped, instantly. We pushed forward into the tunnel, which got increasingly narrow. About 50 feet in, our lights fell on something that made my blood run cold. There, pressed into a small alcove, was a makeshift camp. A dirty sleeping bag, some empty food cans, and a battery-powered lantern. But what really disturbed us were the walls. They were covered in scratched markings, hundreds of tally marks and strange symbols. Some looked fresh, others were clearly older. Among them were photographs pinned to the rock, old Polaroids showing different people, all looking distressed or frightened. The deputy immediately radioed for additional backup. As he was calling it in, we heard movement further down the tunnel, the sound of rocks shifting and something dragging across the ground. The deputy drew his weapon and we both stood frozen, listening. What happened next still gives me nightmares. A figure emerged from the darkness. A woman, but not like any I'd ever seen. She was emaciated, her skin gray with coal dust, and her movements were jerky, almost insect-like. Her eyes reflected our lights like an animal's, and her mouth was stretched in an impossible grin. The deputy shouted for her to stop, but she just tilted her head and made that crying sound again. Except now we could see her face wasn't moving as the sound came out. It was like the cry was coming from somewhere else. Everything after that happened in a blur. The woman lunged forward with inhuman speed. The deputy fired a warning shot, which echoed deafeningly in the confined space. She disappeared back into the darkness, and we heard her scrambling through the tunnels, her cries growing more distant. The subsequent investigation revealed something horrifying. Over the past 30 years, dozens of people had gone missing in this area. Some were hikers or hunters, others were local residents. Many of the Polaroids we found matched missing persons reports. The tunnel system went deeper than anyone had realized, connecting to other abandoned mines in the area. Search teams found more camps, more photos, more evidence of long-term habitation. But they never found the woman. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that she's still down there, moving through those endless dark tunnels, collecting her photos, and making that terrible crying sound to lure in more victims. I inherited my grandfather's hunting cabin in the mountains of eastern Tennessee in 2020. It's a simple 2-room structure built in the 1960s, sitting on about 20 acres of remote woodland. I'd spent summers there as a kid, but hadn't visited in over 15 years. After getting laid off during the pandemic, I decided to renovate the cabin and maybe turn it into a vacation rental. It seemed like a good investment, given how popular remote getaways had become. The property is accessible only by a narrow dirt road that becomes nearly impassable in bad weather. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, and the closest town is a 45-minute drive. Perfect for someone looking to really get away from it all. I arrived in early March to assess the cabin's condition. The structure was sound, but it needed work. I planned to stay for a few weeks to handle the basic repairs myself. The first week was uneventful. I replaced some rotting boards, fixed the roof, and cleared years of debris from around the cabin. But as I worked, I started noticing things that seemed off. First were the marks on the trees. I found deep gouges in the bark of several large oaks near the cabin. They were too high up to be from a bear, and they didn't match any pattern I'd seen before. Some were fresh, others looked older. Then I started finding the bones. Small animals at first, rabbits, squirrels, groundhogs, arranged in neat little piles around the property. They looked cleaned, almost polished. I assumed it was the work of coyotes or maybe a mountain lion, though the arrangements seemed too deliberate. One morning I found all my tools had been moved from where I'd left them the night before. They were laid out in a perfect line from largest to smallest, about 50 feet from the cabin. I tried to convince myself I'd done it myself and forgotten, but I knew I hadn't. That night I heard the first scream. If you've spent time in the mountains, you know they're full of strange sounds, especially at night. But this was different. It started like a woman's scream, but transformed into something else. A sound that made my teeth hurt and my skin crawl. I barely slept that night, keeping my shotgun close. The next morning I found massive footprints in the mud around the cabin. They were human-shaped, but wrong. Too long, with odd spacing between the toes. They came right up to my bedroom window. I called the local sheriff's office. The deputy who came out looked at the prints and got very quiet. He told me there had been incidents in these mountains going back decades. Hunters disappearing, hikers found dead in inexplicable circumstances, strange sounds reported by locals. He advised me to leave before dark. I planned to do just that, but as I was packing my truck, the sky opened up. The rain came down in sheets, turning the dirt road into a muddy river. I was stuck, As darkness fell, the screams started again, closer this time. Multiple voices now calling to each other across the mountains. I barricaded myself in the cabin, shotgun ready. Around midnight, something started circling the cabin. I could hear heavy footsteps in the mud, branches snapping. Whatever it was big. The screams had stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from all directions. Then came the knocking. Slow, deliberate taps on every window, one after another. I saw shadows move past the glass, but they weren't shaped quite right. The humming got louder, and I realized it was coming from inside my head now. I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember is waking up at dawn. The rain had stopped, and the morning was eerily quiet. When I went outside, I found my truck had been torn apart. The engine was completely dismantled, each part laid out neatly on the ground, in concentric circles. It looked like the work of a skilled mechanic, but it would have taken hours, and I hadn't heard a thing. Written in the mud nearby was a message: "This place is ours." I walked out that morning, following the dirt road for hours until I got cell service. I never went back to the cabin, but I still checked the local news regularly. Every few months I read about another disappearance in those mountains, another strange incident that can't be explained. The cabin still stands empty. Sometimes locals report seeing lights there at night and hearing those terrible screams. But no one goes to investigate anymore. Some places in these mountains belong to something else, something that doesn't want us there. I drive for a rural mail delivery service in eastern Kentucky. My route covers some of the most remote parts of Pike County, where houses are few and far between, and the roads twist through valleys that never see direct sunlight. Last winter, I started servicing a new section of my route, a 5-mile stretch of gravel road that leads to an abandoned church. There's only one house on that road now, belonging to an elderly woman named Ms. Martha. She's lived there alone since her husband died in the 1990s. The church itself has been empty since the 1970s, when the coal mines closed and most of the community moved away. It's a simple wooden building with boarded-up windows and a small cemetery behind it. Miss Martha told me she still maintains some of the graves, her husband's and her children's who died young. The first time I met her, she warned me never to drive that road after sunset. "Things change when the sun goes down," she said. "The road doesn't always lead where it's supposed to." I didn't think much of it until December 2024, when an early winter storm delayed my route. By the time I reached the church road, the sun was already setting. I considered skipping it, but Ms. Martha was expecting her Social Security check, and I knew she counted on it. The temperature was dropping fast, and an odd fog was rolling in from the hollows. As I turned onto the gravel road, something felt different. The trees seemed closer to the road than usual, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands. About a mile in, I noticed the first anomaly. There was a mailbox I'd never seen before, rusted and tilting at an odd angle. I slowed down to check it, but there was no house nearby, just dense forest. Then I saw another mailbox and another. Soon, both sides of the road were lined with them, each one more decrepit than the last. Some had names painted on them that I recognized from the gravestones in the church cemetery. The fog got thicker, and my headlights seemed to be getting dimmer. The road itself started to feel wrong. The gravel turned to dirt, then to what looked like old cobblestones. I checked my GPS, but it showed me in the middle of nowhere, miles from where I should have been. That's when I saw the lights. They looked like lanterns moving through the trees, parallel to the road. I could make out shapes carrying them. Human figures, but they moved stiffly, like puppets on strings. I tried to turn around, but the road had become too narrow. The lights were getting closer, and now I could hear singing. An old hymn. But the voices were distorted, like a record playing at the wrong speed. Through the fog, I began to see houses. Old structures that I knew weren't there during the day. They looked lived in, with smoke coming from the chimneys. But they were clearly from another time. Through the windows, I could see more of those stiff figures, all turned to watch my truck pass. The singing got louder, and I realized it was coming from the church ahead. But it wasn't the church I knew. This building was whole, its windows glowing with warm light. The cemetery behind it was full of fresh graves, and people, or things that looked like people, were moving among the headstones. I stopped the truck, paralyzed with fear. The figures with the lanterns had reached the road now. In the light, I could see their faces, gray and sunken with eyes that reflected like mirrors. They were wearing clothes from different eras, mining outfits, Sunday suits, dresses from the early 1900s. Suddenly, Ms. Martha appeared at my window. But she looked different, younger, but somehow wrong. Her eyes were completely black, and her smile revealed too many teeth. "I told you not to come after dark," she said, but her voice came from everywhere at once. "Now you'll have to stay. We need a new mailman. The last one's been here since 1963. I slammed the truck into reverse and hit the gas. The engine roared, but the truck didn't move. The figures were all around me now, their lanterns creating a circle of light. The singing from the church had become a deafening chorus. Then, through my panic, I remembered something my grandmother once told me about the old ways in these mountains. I reached for the small Bible I keep in my glove compartment, a family habit I'd always thought was silly, and started reciting the Lord's Prayer. The effect was immediate. The figures recoiled, their lanterns flickering. The singing turned to howls of rage. Ms. Martha's face contorted into something inhuman, and she backed away from the truck. I kept praying as I tried the engine again. This time the truck moved. I reversed as fast as I dared on the narrow road, not stopping until I reached the main highway. When I looked back, the fog was gone, and the road looked normal again. The next day I drove the route in bright sunlight. Everything was as it should be, just a gravel road leading to an old church. Miss Martha was in her yard, looking her normal elderly self. She accepted her mail without mentioning the previous night, but she gave me a knowing look. I still drive that route, but never after sunset. Sometimes on cloudy days, I catch glimpses of those mailboxes appearing along the road or hear faint hymns coming from the empty church. And every now and then I see fresh flowers on graves that no living person tends to. There are places in these mountains where the veil between worlds is thin, where time isn't as linear as we think.